And now, The View from Washington, an explanation of U.S. policy.
The brutal response of the Iranian regime to protests that broke out in hundreds of cities across Iran in mid-November has shocked the world. At a press briefing, U.S. Special Representative for Iran Brian Hook noted that while the true number of casualties are not known, the regime could have murdered over 1,000 Iranian citizens since the protests began.
Many thousands of Iranians have been wounded, and at least 7,000 protesters have been detained in Iran's prisons. Many of these protesters have been sent to two prisons, the Great Tehran Penitentiary and Garchak Prison.
The United States, said Mr. Hook, calls for the immediate release of all protesters detained in prison, as well as all the political prisoners currently held by the regime. He called the recent protests the worst political crisis the regime has faced in its 40 years.
All of these protests are directed at a corrupt religious mafia that has been terrorizing its own people. The only support left for the regime is with a handful of clerics, whom the Iranian people despise for having imposed 40 years of brutality on them. The regime now maintains its grip on power through brute force.
Now is the time, said Special Representative Hook, for all nations to stand with the Iranian people, diplomatically isolate the regime, and sanction those officials who are responsible for murdering innocent Iranians.
That was The View from Washington, an explanation of U.S. policy.